Our first panel of today is going to drive deeper into the intersection of policies and implementation to bring light in more details of the issues of homelessness. I will now turn it over to our distinguished moderator, Beatrice Delatorre, Chief Philanthropist Officer at Trinity Church, Wall Street.
Great, thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. Buenos dias. We are so thrilled to be here. I am Bea, my name is Bea de la Torre, and I am the Chief Philanthropy Officer at Trinity Church NYC. We really support a lot of groups that are working on the housing and homelessness crisis, including Help USA. And our great work on the housing front is led by Thebia Hiwa, Terry Davis Merchant, and Damiori Almonte, who are all here today. So come and talk to us afterwards if you're interested in learning more about what we do. But more importantly, we really partner with every single person on this panel and their incredible work. Because as Anne so well said, we really need to stay united and work together in order to address the challenges ahead of us. So I want to just quickly introduce them. You have all their information on their bios on your program, but starting right here to my right, we have Vicki Bean, who's the Weinfeld Professor of Law at NYU School of Law and also a faculty director at the Furman Center. We have Baba Haum, who is the Senior Vice President of Programs at Enterprise Community Partners. Rafael Sestero, President and CEO of the Community Preservation Corporation. Rachel Fee, the Executive Director of the New York Housing Conference, and Leila Bozorg, the Executive Director of Housing for NYC Office of the Mayor. So today what we're going to talk about in this panel, which is so aptly named The Housing Crisis is the Homelessness Crisis, is where the disconnect is between policy and implementation, and why, even though we know that housing is a solution to homelessness, tonight there's going to be 86,000 people sleeping in a DHS shelter. And when you add other shelter numbers, we know that number is much higher, and on top of that, there's thousands of people that are going to be unhoused, sleeping on the streets of New York. So where is that disconnect? Even though we have so many different programs, so much funding, where are the gaps, and why haven't we been able to solve this issue? So we're going to focus a little bit more on the housing piece, but of course, you know, housing is the solution to homelessness. But we're going to talk about the challenges that it comes from developing affordable housing, from operating affordable housing, some of the political barriers that we need to surpass, the community opposition that we have been seeing sadly increasing in recent years, and the NIMBYism, why getting a voucher doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to be stably housed, and why it takes so long to fill a unit, what's happening there. So we're going to talk about the challenges first, but of course, as Anne very much said, we also have to anchor solutions. So we will transition into also talking about some solutions, some things that we have tried in New York, some things that are have been done in other municipalities that have worked, so that we can really leave with a call to action. And some glimmers. I love that new term. I'm going to use that for moving forward. So with that, I am going to first pose a question to all the panelists and have them go around the room and answer this. And I did want to quickly note that I will leave time at the end for questions from the audience, hopefully like 2 to 3 questions. So my first question to all of you, and we'll start answering going down the line, is housing is a solution to homelessness is a very clear mandate. It's very clear, you know, we know what it is. Yet it's been so hard to implement. From your perspective, why do you think that is the case? And what are the main challenges that you're seeing in New York City? Vicki, we will start with you.
So, well, thank you, Bea, and thank you to HELP for organizing this amazing day and hopefully very fruitful and united day. So there are many, many reasons why we don't have enough housing to house our families and households across the United States. The one that I want to focus on is really the regulatory system, right? The regulatory system imposes enormous numbers and complexity in the development of any housing, whether we're talking about just standard zoning and its limits on density, to fees that are charged, to building code requirements. All of those things were very well intentioned. I've worked in government. I have enormous respect for our regulatory agencies, but they add up. And we're in a situation now where it costs much more to build an affordable housing unit than the median cost of housing across the United States, and that's a headline that DOGE is just waiting to tackle, right? And that's something that we've got to bring down those costs, and partly we face a situation where the perfect is the enemy of the good, and yes, all those regulations do good things, but in total, they mean that housing is just too expensive for what people make, right? So we need to bring down the cost of housing, and we need to bring up the incomes of people, and though that's a system that we just have to work on. Now, one of the reasons why the regulatory process becomes so costly is because we have a system that gives too many people too many veto points on any new development in their community, right? And we have a situation where the hearings, the process is too long, too complex, too technical. Nobody is satisfied. Nobody comes through the process feeling like, oh yes, they listened to me. Maybe they disagreed, but they listened, and we got a better project, right? The people who show up are often people who have a disproportionate interest in, or think they have a disproportionate interest in the question because they are homeowners and they're protecting their investment. They're building upon a system where the most stable form of investment for a family is often their home, and they're doing everything they can, understandably, to protect the value of that home. But it results in a situation where some people, because they have a deed to a house or because they have a lease to an apartment, feel like they can stand in the way of everyone else achieving exactly the same thing, right? And we've got to get away from that system, not for lack of trying. There are all kinds of experiments. I want to really shout out Layla and her work at HPD in building all kinds of new public engagement systems. Nevertheless, we still have systems that just allow too many veto points, so that Elizabeth Street Garden, 12 years later, we're still fighting, right? The Help One project, took way too many years because of political opposition and public participation. So those are key problems that we've got to try to solve.
Thank you, Vicki. And I saw the Charter Commission release a report this morning, so it's going to be really interesting to see what comes out of that, because your points are spot on. Baba, I'll turn it over to you.
Well, thank you, Help USA, for putting together today's conference. I wholeheartedly agree with Vicki's reflection about all the pain points and how we delay development and stymie development from a few people who are, protectionist in nature. But I think our housing strategy is also perspective looking. We're planning for the future. We are thinking right through City of Yes, we're going to have new housing types across the city. We all know that the city's housing strategy hasn't really kept up with the need and the population growth, and so we're behind in terms of the available units. But when we think about homelessness, right, and folks in need today, our housing strategies 5 years, 10 years down the line doesn't address the need today. And that is some of the disconnect. How are we as a city, as a government, as folks in the field to provide resources, thinking about how we address the need today? And today's conference is about the upstream strategy. So I want to focus on some of those challenges about addressing need today, which are operational in nature. We know that there are challenges on the lease-up side, how quickly we match and identify folks who are eligible for housing and get them into their units. And we know there are affordability challenges. What are the resources that people have to pay their rent, whether it's vouchers, whether it's their own individual income, whether it's SSI? All of that also have regulatory components to it. All of that have operational barriers, and it causes delay in getting people housed and matched properly. And Ann also talked about what are the needs for services, right? So from the housing perspective, we're thinking about building units and how affordable those units are, at what income level can an individual or family afford, how can they stay in their units long term, but there are services that should be attached to some families, not all, But some families need more than a voucher. They need the connection to social services. They need the connection to community. They need financial planning. They need to think about beyond today. And so those are some of the gaps within the existing systems and existing programs. And so I'm happy that the housers are here today in a panel discussion that is talking about the interconnection between social services, the human services, and the housing need, and how housing is a solution to homelessness. But we've got to close some of those gaps. We've got to get people into housing faster. We've got to reduce the regulatory processes and barriers. And I commend the city of New York just in the last week and a half for announcing changes to its approval of getting people into housing through the marketing guidelines and some of the waivers that are going to exist over the next year. But we need to take this momentum, this 1 year period, to say, what can we permanently cement to move people into housing much more quickly? From Enterprise's data, normally, the average time, it would take about 6 months from a building completing construction into being fully leased up. We're now seeing that 9 months is being added to that time. So you're thinking lease up is taking, in some instances, 14 months for a building which has been built to meet affordability and to serve low-income families. And to the city's credit, they've paired setting aside units for homeless families as part of its plan and meeting housing need. But if we're taking 14 months to lease up, that's 14 months that families are sitting in shelter. That's 14 months that a unit isn't meeting a community or individual's needs. So those operational challenges are a big, big area of focus that I think we all need to pay attention to.
Thank you, Baba. And thank you for bringing up that we need to also focus on upstream solutions, which we will talk about as we move along in the panel. Rafael, I'll turn it to you.
Thanks, Bea, and echo everybody's thanks for to Help USA for putting on this day. Agree with everything that's been said so far. I think there's two things that I would just add to the conversation. One is that, and I'll focus really on New York City because that's where I've spent most of my 35-year career. But we make it really hard to say yes, and we make it really easy to say no. It's always easier to say no, but we make it easier to say no because of a lot of things that Vicky and Baba talked about, but also because I think we don't have a broad enough conversation, which is why I think this day is so important, about how all of the different housing policies in New York impact the most urgent manifestation of the housing crisis, which is homelessness. And so one of the things that I really want us to focus on a little bit is the fact that a number of policy choices that we have made in the city and at the state level over the course of the last decade or so has left us with an affordable housing stock and a rent-regulated housing stock that is in crisis. It is deeply in crisis, a level of crisis that we haven't seen in 30 years. We have buildings that can't cover their operating expenses, rent collections are down, and I think we have to understand that to the urgency of the problem, the fastest way to get somebody out of shelter is to get them into existing housing. And if that existing housing in and of itself is in distress, that makes that process a lot harder, and it makes it easier for people to say no and harder to get them to say yes. And so I think we need to really take a holistic look at this. Lots of people talk about, and I talk about a lot too, the fact that we need more housing supply. We need to make it faster and easier to build, and we absolutely need to do all of that because at the end of the day, the vacancy rate in New York City is 1.4%-ish, which is not healthy. But we also need to recognize that we need to think more comprehensively about what the existing buildings that we've invested in. New York City has been for generations the leader, the deputy mayor, talked about breaking records of new construction. We're building units, right? But we're not getting ahead. And part of the challenge is that we're swimming upstream, and we're not recognizing the needs of the existing housing stock, which makes it much harder for that stock to be a value add to solutions to the homelessness crisis.
Yeah, I was going to say the preservation piece is absolutely crucial to the equation. We cannot build our way out of this. We have to preserve absolutely all of our stock. Rachel, I'll turn it to you.
So we've been thinking a lot about supply side solutions, and I guess some of the disconnect that I've seen, some of it's among our partners, our advocacy partners. I think there is a trend, especially if you are an advocate for ending homelessness, to only support the most affordable subsidized housing. But I think what that offers then is for people that don't want any housing to latch on to this, kind of false narrative of, oh, we're going to reject this new housing because it's not affordable enough. So I've seen in my own neighborhood, that being, used as an excuse to oppose housing, but that really wasn't what my neighbors wanted at all. They didn't want more affordable housing. They wanted to kill the project. And so I think that has been a big disconnect. Last year we led the Yes to Housing Coalition, supporting City of Yes housing reforms for our zoning code. And many of our partners in the homelessness space supported that and joined the coalition. But I had some groups tell me, no, we won't join because we only support adding more housing that is 100% affordable for the lowest income renters. And I support that too, but I also know that not every unit that we need in the city of New York needs to be targeted in that way. So I do think building a bigger tent for adding more supply is actually really important. So today my organization released our, I think it's our 4th edition of the New York City Housing Tracker, and we show by council district which communities are saying yes to affordable housing and which are not. And this year, we're celebrating Council Member Banks in District 42 for saying yes to approving more than 1,400 units of affordable housing. Now think about the 51 council districts we have in the city. 20 of those districts said yes to fewer than 50 units. So if every neighborhood isn't doing its part, and we're not looking for those opportunities, and each building matters. Saying yes to each unit matters. I think we have a real problem of not just addressing our supply goals, but our goals of a more equitable city where you have choices, different housing options in every neighborhood, and we're just not seeing that right now. So when I think of some of those challenges, that's what I'm thinking of. But I also know, like as Vicki and Raphael were pointing, that the cost to build housing is, growing more and more, that we also have a set of renters in New York City that are never going to afford market rent, that their income, the disconnect is where market rent is and their income. And so it's so critical, I think, to support rental assistance. So, we've been looking at this, let's add supply, but then let's also have programs that are supporting the lowest income renter to access that supply. So right now, 1 in 4 eligible renters across the US have access to Section 8 rental assistance to help pay their rent. Obviously, a lot of people are left out of that, hugely rent burdened and housing insecure, which we know very well in New York City. But I have to say, the city of New York has really stepped in with city FEPs. I don't think they get credit for the expansion that's actually happened. They're now spending $1.2 billion on the program. It is the 2nd largest rental assistance program in the US after NYCHA's Section 8 program. 54,000 households helped. So I think some rule changes are coming out on that today, which a lot of people in this room are not going to like. But I would say that I think that the city of New York DSS has avoided a humanitarian crisis by getting those vouchers out over the last few years. So, I just want to say how critical that is. And I think for many partners in this room, we had a big win in Albany with the announcement yesterday of $50 million for a new housing assistance voucher program. It's a drop. Big shout out to WIN, Vocal, Legal Aid. I mean, they were up in Albany every day this session fighting for that, and others. We're really excited to see that, but it's a drop in the bucket compared to the need. So I think a little bit later I'm going to talk about some of the threats facing our rental assistance programs, but I'll just end it there.
And I was going to say with HAVP, huge win. Now we have to fight to make sure that is a much bigger number than what's included in the budget. So that's the next one. But really congrats to everyone that worked on that. I know a lot of people are in the room here. Okay, Leila, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thank you. So I think a lot of the panelists have hit on many of the key points, but I think kind of a way to summarize what folks are saying is that homelessness has really been a symptom of our very local housing market conditions, and more specifically, I think a series of failures in all the structures and systems, whether those are social systems, political systems, regulatory systems that impact our local housing market conditions. And Vicky hit on the regulatory issues. Some are zoning, some are in our housing maintenance code, some are in our building codes, some are in our fire code. I mean, there's just this kind of Kafkaesque layering of regulatory systems that have impacted what we're able to build, where we're able to build, how quickly we're able to build. There's our political systems, our very local land use process that empowers kind of a local voice, and that's not even that's kind of what I'm referring to as member deference. It's not even written in ULURP, it's just a practice that the city council has that empowers a local council member to block a project that has cascading effects across the city. That's a symptom of our political system. We have the costs of what it takes to build and preserve housing, and some of the state policies that have impacted that, as Raphael spoke to. And then for the housing that we do have, we have our own kind of processes and bureaucratic stratification that has made it very difficult to lease up units very quickly. So even though homelessness is very much a national issue, I think the kind of manifestation is very much a symptom of our local conditions and all of our local really failures to solve this problem effectively. I would say optimistically, we also know what works. And I think part of, I think what hopefully comes out of today and other meetings like this is like really all focusing on rowing in the same direction and advocating for what works. And that often does require a lot of resources. There's no question that addressing this issue is expensive, but it also requires really intense political will to solve these really challenging and hairy problems. I mean, things like City of Yes, we're considering charter revision changes to our land use process. These are politically contentious. They're very difficult to kind of unpack and put back together and require a lot of political will across the spectrum, and a lot of advocacy and a lot of focused advocacy, as Rachel spoke to with the Yes to Housing Coalition, which came out in support of City of Yes, which is focused on the zoning issue. But yeah, I'll just end there. I think that kind of summarizes the mix of things folks have said.
Great, thank you, Leila. And thank you, that was also a really good transition to start talking about some solutions, right? So I'm gonna ask now some targeted questions to each one of you, and feel free to chime in at any point. But Vicky, starting with you. So, you have a perspective where you're seeing what other municipalities are doing across many other geographies, leading the Furman Center and with some of your work. And I know that in New York, sometimes we think that we have all the answers, but we really don't. So, could you tell us about some models that you have seen in other places that have worked in order to address the housing and homelessness crisis?
Sure, thanks. So the Furman Center is tracking all of the land use reforms that are taking place across the country. More than 20 states have done very substantial land use reforms, and those states range from deep blue, California, Washington, Oregon, Massachusetts, et cetera, to deep red, Montana, Arizona, even some in Texas and Florida. So we're seeing enormous progress in all kinds of ways. We're not seeing that in New York State, and we need to see it in New York State, right? So the range of things that are going on across the country is really dramatic. Everything from insisting upon particular numbers of affordable homes or numbers of homes that a municipality has to allow be built. And if it's not allowing that to be built, an ability of the state attorney general to sue the city, and an ability of developers to sue the city that's not keeping up with its goals. That's something that, you know, we've talked about in New York City with the framework for housing that the city council passed, and that HPD and DCP are now working to make numbers real, to make metrics, so that we don't have, as Rachel was saying, 20 community districts that can say no thanks to housing, and you have, you know, basically 10 who are providing about 70% of all of our new housing. So that's an important thing. Just if you can measure it, if you can say, as the New York Housing Conference's tracker does, hey, these are people, these are the community districts that are not stepping up, that are not doing their job, and really, you know, target those kinds of community districts. That's an enormous plus. Other things that are going on are massive reforms to minimum parking requirements, which add, as you all who develop know, I mean, when we first passed some parking minimum reforms in New York in 2016, I had developer after developer tell me how many more units they were able to build as a result of not having to build places for cars, right? Surely people are more important than cars, and so that's, you know, that's a major thing. The city is making great progress on that. Still more to be done, and more to be done certainly across the state. Another major issue that people are trying to reform, that states are trying to reform, and cities, is in the process, right? Limiting the number of hearings, requiring that if a project is turned down, that the decision maker has to issue findings of fact and an explanation based upon objective criteria, not sort of, I'll know a good project when I see it kind of criteria, but objective criteria about why it's being denied and what it would take for it to pass muster, right? So those kinds of procedural reforms, eliminating a lot of the vetoes, so restricting, for example, one of the major forms of litigation that stops projects is the environmental impact review of congestion, of traffic congestion, right? So that's not even an art, it's certainly not a science, and it provides lots of grounds for litigation that holds projects up for years and years. Some states are saying that's too loosey-goosey. We're not going to allow suits to challenge environmental impact review on the basis of those kinds of very subjective kinds of criteria. So those are some of the things that places across the United States are doing. Another that I'll just mention, because it's something that's before Albany this year, is allowing lands owned by faith-based organizations, and in some states all nonprofit organizations, to basically be automatically zoned for a particular density, to allow development on those properties by those mission-driven owners. So that's pending before the state legislature and our state legislature, and about 6 states have already passed those kinds of measures. So those are some of the kinds of things that we could be doing.
Thank you, Vicki. And I will say, since I work for a faith-based institution, faith-based organizations really want to address the housing and homelessness crisis, but it just becomes so hard. We are thankfully in a position where it's easier for us because we have resources, we have land, we have funding, but so many others that we work with come to us and they're so overwhelmed with all the regulations ahead of them. So I really hope the Faith-Based Affordable Housing Act passes. So I encourage you all to read more about it if you don't know, and to do anything you can can to support it. Okay, so Baba, you talked a little bit about upstream, and I always say the best way to address homelessness is to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place, right? Prevention and upstream prevention is so absolutely key. And Enterprise Community Partners has been doing some really interesting work around this and launching some innovative programming. So Baba, can you talk a little bit about that and what's worked and what hasn't and what we should be focused on?
Well, thank you, Bea, and Trinity is an important partner in that pilot effort. So we have launched last year a program called Home for Good. And Home for Good, it really seeks to connect folks who are on the brink of an eviction due to rental arrears with services faster. So this model is not waiting for an eviction action to be commenced in order to connect someone with the financial resources to stay in their housing, right? So we know right now that the approach is wait for an eviction action and then maybe you can connect to home base or get a one-shot deal or some other kind of support to stabilize that crisis. But Home for Good really aims to get in front of the crisis. Don't wait for an eviction action and remove the landlord from the onus of also being a service provider and connecting and understanding how to navigate the various human service systems. And so what the owner does in that program is say, they agree that in lieu of filing a foreclosure action, they're going to connect that tenant who's behind on rent to a third-party service organization, and that third-party service organization works to connect them to home base, rental assistance, or even a voucher if that family is available. And they work long-term with the family, also on financial counseling, thinking long-term about stability. And it's upstream because, again, we're not waiting to that crisis moment of the threat of losing your housing to connect folks to services. What we've seen so far, there are over 400 families that have been enrolled since the program's inception, over $1 million recouped in rental arrears, and we have protected housing. We've allowed folks to stay in their homes, and we think that that is an important contributor to homelessness. We're all working to bring down the numbers, but we also have to worry about the loss. The loss of housing creates homelessness. And so this program is really thinking and driving towards that, and we're really excited about growing it over a 3-year period to support over 2,500 families. And if we can model this right, and the part of the innovation here also, it uses an impact investment model, that the landlord agrees not to start an eviction action, but if we're successful in connecting that tenant to supports and other systems, the landlord pays for the services, right? Pays for the services rendered because those services are cheaper than an eviction action. Those services protect housing. Those services provide stability to community and to the landlord. And so when we talk about the operational challenges that owners and operators face, when you have to evict a tenant, that creates an economic vacancy. You now have to re-rent that unit, whether you're going through the city's processes or going through a private market. That's a window you have lost income. So if we're able to support tenants and connect them, the landlord doesn't suffer that economic vacancy. They get the rental arrears that they're due, and we get tenants on the right track to long-term stability, protect community, and really incentivize housing stability. So that's part of the innovation that we hope to unlock and hopefully maybe take it around the country.
Yeah, it's such a smart model, and the results are looking really promising. So hopefully it is something that could be scaled. Thank you so much, Baba. Rafael, so I'm going to turn it over to you. You know, CPC is involved in so many different deals across the city, across the state. So you sit in a place where you can see things from both a micro and a macro level, and you already brought up that the rent stable stock is in crisis, right? So what things need to change in order to get to a point where it's just simply not sustainable to operate this very important resource that we have in the affordable housing stock? And yeah, what are the main changes that need to happen?
Thanks, Bea. So just for a little bit of context, at CPC, we have a loan portfolio in New York City alone, that is, $1.5 to $2 billion across almost 50,000 housing units. These housing units are all rent stabilized, but they are also substantially subsidized through the various programs that we work together with on the City of New York. So when I talk about the housing stock being in crisis and the impacts, it's not just privately owned rent stabilized stock. It's the housing stock that's owned by many of the people that are in this room, nonprofit owners, mission-driven owners who are developing and preserving affordable housing in conjunction with the City of New York. And what the data in our loan portfolio shows is truly alarming. Operating expenses have gone up between 6 and 10% per year over the last 5 years. Rents are not going up to keep pace with that. Rent collections, since COVID, there was a significant dip in rent collections during COVID. It came back up a little bit, but it has not gotten anywhere near the rent collection levels pre-COVID, where pre-COVID, and for most of my entire career in New York City, rent collections were around 97, 98% across the entire industry, meaning we were collecting 97, 98% of the rent on the portfolio. Today, in our portfolio, rent collections are hovering at 91, 92%. That's a significant drop in income. So not only are rents not keeping pace, but rent collections have come down. So what does all of that mean? It means we have significant distress in our portfolio for the first time in our 50-year history. Prior to now, delinquencies in our portfolio were less than 1%. Today, our delinquency rate in our loan portfolio is right around 3%. Again, may not sound like a big number, but it's triple or more than triple what it used to be. Enforcement actions are way up, meaning foreclosure actions are going up on the underlying loans in the buildings, and the number of loans we have that can't cover the basic expenses and the loan payments are going up. So across the board, right, we're seeing all levels of distress in the entirety of our portfolio. And I say all of that because for me, this is, when you think about the housing system that we have here in New York City, this is an alarming set of trends. There's been an enormous investment on behalf of the City of New York over the course of the last decade in stemming the economic distress that happened in our public housing stock over multiple different generations. And what we're seeing right now is the beginnings of a similar challenge in the affordable housing stock citywide. So, what are the solutions? I don't know that I have any great ones. And I will preface my remarks around solutions by saying that they are probably going to be both unpopular and probably unrealistic. But to me, the math leads you to two very simple things that are both unpopular and unrealistic. One is the changes to the rent regulation system that happened in 2019 have severely limited the ability of our housing stock to be sustainable. We have to allow rents to increase. There's no other option. We cannot continue to just expect that this problem will go away and expenses will come down and buildings will somehow figure it out. That isn't going to happen. But we also can't just let rents go up and not have another side of the equation, which to me is what a number of people have talked about on this panel. And again, agree with Rachel completely. Kudos to the City of New York for stepping up in a major way around rental assistance. But we have to begin to be more aggressive about understanding that many tenants are going, residents in our buildings are going to need rental assistance support. We have very large rental assistance programs in the City of New York, but they're too hard to use. right? I know people are working on this issue, and again, I'm not suggesting that we're not working on ways to make it easier. Baba talked about what Enterprise is doing. You know, I know that the city is working hard to make it easier. But the reality is, it's too hard to get qualified, takes too long to get qualified for rental assistance if you're a resident, and it's too hard to use if you're a property owner. And so for me, solutions around how do we start to impact this problem revolve around a similar theme you've heard on the development side, which is breaking down the regulatory structures that we've put in place to protect the public good and make sure that we have more availability, simpler way to use the voucher assistance, and make it easier for people and for owners to say yes to getting in the voucher queue. At the end of the day, we have to understand that the income that comes into the building is what sustains those buildings. I've been doing this for 35 years in New York City. We've seen this movie before. For those of you who are as old as I am, you remember what the 70s and 80s looked like in our housing stock. We can't let that crisis happen again, and we need to start to think about the building stock both as one that is in crisis, but also that is a huge part of the underlying solution for our housing challenges in New York.
Thank you, Rafael. Such an important point. And I just want to say on the rental assistance specifically and the solutions there, I saw Commissioner Park just came in. I really want to shout out her and her team for all the work they're doing on that. And also other models like Anthos Home. I think Laura is here as well. I saw her. So it's good that there's models out there, but I totally agree that it needs to be a lot more than we're even doing now. So with that, Rachel, I'm going to turn it over to you. So there's been so much coming out of Washington. I know that Anne told us to keep our joy. It's sometimes hard to keep the joy when you read the headlines. And you track, the New York Housing Conference tracks so closely everything that's happening at the federal, state, and city level. So focusing more on what's happening on the federal level, Rachel, what keeps you up at night? In terms of the impact to New York City, what are the main challenges? And also, is there any potential opportunity or something good coming out of these crazy headlines?
So if you guys thought Raphael was Debbie Downer, I can take you all to a whole other level.
100%.
No joy.
So, you know, we're not expecting good news from Washington. Anne had mentioned earlier the president's budget is supposed to come out probably this week, possibly next week. And, you know, we're expecting really, really drastic and profound cuts and policy change from the White House. I think the silver lining in that is that I think the proposals will be so drastic and so harmful that Congress will not adopt them, right? And like that's like the more extreme that budget proposal is, like kind of the better advocacy tool it is for us to fighting back and finding champions in Congress that are going to say, no, this goes too far. So, you know, I think in the last Trump term, we saw, you know, eliminate the home program, eliminate CDBG, eliminate public housing capital, and assistance to mixed status households in HUD-assisted programs. I think this time we'll see time limits on assistance. Can you imagine time limits on assistance in New York City? Like, where would somebody go in public housing or with a Section 8 voucher if, right, they're expected to increase their income, you know, 4 times, 5 times what they're earning now to reach market rent. So time limits definitely is one that keeps me up at night. And it's one we're going to have to really advocate around. So we'll see exactly what's in the proposal, but that would make me really nervous. But then I think we could see even more profound changes of, like there has been discussion of moving some of the main HUD programs, like pushing it back to the states, right? And so, I don't want to be totally alarmist, but I could tell you what we've already seen to give you a sense of how important the federal housing programs are to New York, and what cuts can look like. So we have 1 million HUD-assisted, 1 million New Yorkers are in HUD-assisted housing right now. In March, the public housing authorities across the country got notice that the emergency housing voucher program, which was, issued in COVID, issued under the Section 8 program to make sure that people were safely housed. At the time, the dangers of congregate housing were, on everybody's mind. And so the idea was, we'll issue these emergency housing vouchers, help the most vulnerable renters become stably housed. So the program was funded at $5 billion, 70,000 vouchers issued across the US, 9,400 in New York. In New York City, we have 7,700. So in March, this notice came to the housing agencies saying, we're actually not going to give any more money out on this program, and when this is exhausted, that's it. So some of these vouchers will be ending, maybe the end of this year or by 2026 for sure. So this is going to be a top advocacy issue for us. 7,700 households in New York. That's 16,000 people. 6,600 children, and their average household income is 18,000. So the vouchers were used, and Vicki was at City Hall at the time, like trying to use these vouchers to help the most vulnerable households. So a huge number victims of domestic violence, but other special populations like people who ended up homeless and then in health and hospitals, right, and moving into permanent housing. So their average rent is, I think it's about $2,300 a month, and these households with the average income of 18,000 can afford less than 500. So in 1 year's time, I don't know how households are going to, increase income by 400%. It's something we're all going to have to advocate for. And I think a really important point here also is these renters are in, we have 5,700 landlords in the program. Almost half of them in rent-stabilized housing, Raphael. And, we are going to need them to advocate too. And for landlords to be forced to evict if the government isn't, tenants can keep paying their share of the rent. If the government isn't paying their share, like we're in a really big problem. So it's something, that I think it really shows what we're dealing with in a new administration in Washington and how severe some of these actions can be. And this issue in particular, we will be fighting for solutions either way. If it's increasing the budget at the federal level, which is going to be really an uphill battle, or pushing the city and state to come in and help. But, that's just one example. But we will know more. We'll be posting summaries of the policy change being proposed on our website, and also New York impact, both for the city and the state. So you can look out for that.
Thank you, Rachel. Yeah, Rafael.
Can I just make one comment? I think one of the reasons I said that some of my solutions are not realistic is because one of the things that we all should be keeping our eye on are cuts to other programs that are going to severely impact state and local government budgets. And so it's great that our city and our state are putting up money for rental assistance and other things, but when that budget comes, if the cuts are passed to things like Medicaid, then you're going to have drastic impacts on state and local government budgets, which could affect our ability to continue to get the levels of funding that we're getting from city and state government.
Yeah. I'll actually add to that, it's not just cuts to other programs, it's also cuts to programs that impact a resident's ability to afford and pay their own rent, right? Whether it's cuts to SNAP, cuts or the non-existence of childcare, the issues around why good paying, good wage jobs are so hard to find and sustain and keep. There's this whole ecosystem of issues that is impacting affordability and impacting someone's ability to pay rent. And so our solutions cannot just be housing solutions as well. We really have to, I think, in this era, focus on kind of cross-sector advocacy as well to really think about, you know, rental assistance, of course, we know works. We also know it's very expensive. We know it's being threatened right now. It's great the state has stepped up recently with HAVP, but in the absence of being able to fill this gap with just rental assistance, we have to be thinking cross-sector about the other ways to make people be able to support people to be able to pay rent. In addition to obviously all the structural things we've been talking about, which are efforts to bring rent down by increasing the supply. So there's this whole kind of ecosystem that where housing is a piece of, and our housing toolkit is a piece of, but is not the only part of.
And I think it also puts more emphasis on do everything we can to break down these regulatory barriers, like Vicky was saying, right? Like, Charter Commission report is out today. You can still submit testimony supporting changes to ULURP. You can go to our website and see what we propose, but very, similar to the Charter Commission's report of, how we can make it easier to build housing. Last week, the city changed their policy for Housing Connect on re-rentals. Like, it's just a really practical solution to break down a barrier, break down some of the red tape, and get people into housing more quickly. So I think we have to be looking for more of those opportunities, and we need our government partners, to be helping there too.
I just want to add one thing in terms of the ecosystem. One of the things that happened here in emergency housing vouchers is a really good example. To get new landlords to agree to enter into the program and to rent to those voucher households was a monumental task. Yeah. And here we are 3 years later saying, yeah, we told you it would be there forever, blah, 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 but never mind, and you undermine everybody, you undermine investors' confidence in the system, and that will have long-term consequences.
Yeah, that's a very good point. Okay, well, we will stay tuned, and I'm just gonna say the other two things that Ann told us.
We can't help ourselves.
Stay united and fight for what you believe in. So, right, let's keep at it. Okay.
Sorry, you said opportunity.
Yeah.
We do have a budget resolution happening, with markups for the tax committee just before Labor Day. The whole thing is going to be crazy, but we are pushing for expansion of the low-income housing tax credit. We still have a window of opportunity there. Not really clear how it's going to go. There is some support to add this to the tax bill. And the Senate said cost doesn't matter, so maybe folks in the House will agree with that. We'll see. But that would be a huge win if we could squeak out some changes to LIHTC, and it would allow New York to build more housing, both the city and the state.
Okay, that's great. That's a positive note.
We're aiming for that.
Yeah, aiming for that. But listen, it's really important to hear all the deep challenges we're in. So thank you for bringing all that up. Okay, Leila, so moving on to you. So, as the Executive Director of Housing, you oversee the housing agencies, and one of the things that has come up is how long it takes to place somebody in a unit. And when it comes specifically to homeless households, it's sometimes like a trillion barriers to jump and hoops to jump through. So we know that some of the agencies have already made some changes. So if you could talk about those, and then what else is coming in order to really expedite that process.
Yeah, and I'll just couch that in, and I think I've mentioned this, but in the reality that we are kind of at every level of processes when it comes to where housing can be built. Then once you have a site and you know it can be built, how that housing can be built, when it comes to then getting to TCO, which is part of how it gets built, when it comes to lottery and lease up, and then when it comes to homeless placements, we have kind of groups of people looking at each of these and ideas that we're executing on at kind of each layer of these procedures. And that's part of the challenge, right, is that it's not just any one process or any one regulation that is the challenge. It's this whole kind of set of policies and procedures that impact where housing gets built, what gets built, and then someone's ability to access that housing. So on the lottery and lease up last week, HPD released updates to marketing handbook and guidelines, as well as Rachel mentioned, updates to how re-rentals will happen. This has really been actually a 2-year effort within the agency, following a lot of feedback from the industry and our partners that we just have to be doing more and better to figure out how to get people into housing faster. And of course, there's always this balance, right? And I just want to be very honest about the fact that we as a city have at times sometimes overcorrected on things, but it comes from a place of, you know, where the city's been sued a number of times, or where we're party to a suit that someone has not been fairly given access to a housing unit. So there's real kind of fairness and equity roots at some of the regulations that have been developed over time. That's not to say they're all the right regulations. There are times when government overcorrects, but there's this real balance that we have to do in making sure someone has very fair and equal access through the lottery to housing, plus efficiency and speed, right? And we do have a 1.4% vacancy rate. The numbers Baba shared about how long it takes to lease up, there's no one that accepts that in city government. I think everyone really is working hard to figure out how do we make sure we move as fast as we can and stay kind of as fair as we can. That's the kind of balancing act that we're doing. So there's some of the changes, for example, are reducing paperwork requirements for households that have vouchers, kind of reducing the kind of proof of income that's required. HOTMA also allowed income qualification from other federal programs to be used as qualifying documentation. We have on homeless placement specifically this working group between HPD, DSS, the deputy mayors, where every month we look at exactly how many homeless placements. I'm not kidding. I mean, we look at it every week, essentially. The staff looks at it every month. We're all sitting there looking at how many units have come in that are available for homeless placements, how many folks have been leased up, how many days is it taking at each step of the process. I mean, that's the kind of harebrained work it takes to make sure that everyone's moving in the same direction. We've added staff to DSS and HPD to move these faster as well. But all of this is an iterative process. I mean, as just a result of some of the work over the past couple of years, HPD's been able to double the weekly placements just in a 2-year period. That's a really great work, and we still know it's not enough. But so we're in this pattern of needing to constantly take feedback, constantly make improvements, but what's great is that improvements have been being made, and there are real results, but it takes that level of attention, it takes resources, and it takes that constant iterative feedback from the industry of where else can we release a lever, and then we have to do the work of balancing that with other kind of fairness and equity issues that come up when you try to move fast.
Thank you, Leila. It's really encouraging to hear there's positive movement there, even though a recognition that there's a lot more to be done. Yeah. So thank you. So we have time for 1 or 2 questions from the audience. So I'm just going to open it up to see who has a question. And Samantha's walking around with a microphone. Okay, great.
Hi everyone, my name is Noah Shaheen. I'm the Senior Program Director at Lenox Hill Neighborhood House. I oversee both the supportive housing program and our women's shelter. I had a question regarding the Home for Good program. So I think like it was mentioned for family, does this mean the program is also eligible for single adults? And also for like a supportive housing like mine is not a transitional, it's like a permanent supportive housing, which means a lot of our tenants do pay like their share of rent, like 30%. And unfortunately, in the last like year, I would say 2 of our tenants were evicted because of a non-payment court case, because they were just accumulating rental arrears for years. So I wanted to know if they would also qualify for the Home for Good program, because their one-shot deal will just denied over and over again.
So Home for Good is open to single individuals, not just families, since that was your first question. And the way that the program works, it's a owner who is signing up their portfolio. So it's not open to individuals or individual units. So what we're trying to do is maximize the resources across portfolios as a way of, again, because it is an incentive-based program where the owner is paying for the services that they're able to connect their tenants to. So right now, owners sign up to participate and submit their portfolio to the program, and it is open up to singles and families.
Thank you for your question. Any other questions? Yeah, sure. So what should be, when we all leave this room today, what should we be thinking about and focus on, and what is our action step?
I'll jump in. I think our key action step is to unite across all of the homelessness, housing, but also, as I mentioned earlier, the affordability problem is housing costs are too high and incomes are too low, and we need to join with people who are trying to bring incomes up. And trying to get people into better jobs, because way too many, as you all know, of our homeless families are working families, but today's wages do not pay the rent. So we need to try to bring housing costs down, and we need to try to bring incomes up. And that's a chance to unite across a broader set of people, but certainly within our own community, as Rachel was saying, we shouldn't be fighting about, whether it has to be 100% affordable, whether it has to be this kind of perfect. We should be uniting to stave off the kinds of cuts that we're seeing threatened.
I agree that we need the sectors and the full ecosystem to be working together more closely. And I think the charge to this room is we don't have all of the solutions. Raphael said he has an unpopular idea that may be costly or difficult. So we need you all to be helping identify what are the solutions that should be on the table. Like the city has ideas, individual organizations have ideas. We're always looking for ways of how do we unlock housing, whether that is through new supply or getting it to those needy families more quickly, right? How do we address homelessness? How do we prevent homelessness? How do we work upstream? And then finally, I think the charge is not just getting people into housing, but how do we support people to be stably housed over the long term, over the trajectory of the lifespan in which they need support, because it is not just in the moment, and I think sometimes we think just in the moment. So thinking over the long term about what we need to get people into housing, what we need to stabilize them, and what we need to do to support them in the long term.
Anyone else? Any other action steps?
So I mentioned this earlier, but I think it's important to send written testimony to the Charter Commission. We have two proposals that we're pushing for: a fast track for affordable housing and putting some teeth on the City Council's fair housing framework. So you can see our testimony on our website. You can also look at the staff report from the commission today. And I think the more groups they're hearing from, the better to really land in a place with some change. We also have resources under federal advocacy on our website. We have a housing snapshot for each congressional district showing exactly what kind of support we have for HUD-assisted households and how the low-income housing tax credit has been impactful. So please reach out to your member of Congress after this Trump budget drops and tell them what you think of it.
Yes, please.
Yes, please definitely do that.
I'll just add, and I think it's kind of hitting on what Rachel's talking about. I really think that we're in this era where civic and social engagement has kind of really dropped off, and we all feel helpless, and we're in our phones. But I think we have to remember, at least in New York, and I'm sure elsewhere as well, who we vote for matters incredibly to our housing market conditions. Partly because of our political system for how housing gets built, but also the entire system of the types of policies that will or will not make our city more affordable. And so the Charter Revision Commission is looking at one set of ideas within the political context we have, but I think it's really important to not kind of feel, not give up on this idea that who we vote for matters and how we engage with our local elected officials matters, because in New York, it matters intensely. If they hear from you, they know it matters from you. It matters for you. And that is still very much the case as it has been for a long time in our political system. So I think just staying engaged and not giving up and feeling like the advocacy doesn't matter, because it really, truly does for our housing market.
And tomorrow morning at 10 a.m., we're co-hosting a mayoral forum on housing and homelessness with Furman Center, who's actually done all the work because they've been amazing. But it's sold out, but you can join the live stream. And I think really like seeing how candidates are talking about the issue and like digging in and hearing their responses. Does it make sense to you? Is it what you're looking for? I think it'll be really informative.
Who's there and who's not there?
Exactly.
Just saying.
That's going to be really telling. So I'll just add that in challenging moments, also being in community is really important. And I know that sounds really touchy-feely, but it's so important to know that you're not alone, that you're with other people that are fighting the same fight as you, and really to find that humanity in everything that we're facing. So I would also say tap into this incredible community that we have here. Everyone here is so committed to addressing the needs of so many people and fix the system so that no one else has to face homelessness and housing insecurity. So do that. And with that, I will say, please join me in really thanking this fantastic panel that we've had today. Thank you all so much for your time.